John Mouse and the Apple Adventure by Roger Hargreaves. Welcome to Apple Tree Cottage. Apple Tree Cottage is actually quite close to where you live. But because it's rather hidden by all the apple trees in the garden, you probably haven't noticed it. Mr. Simpkin lives in Apple Tree Cottage. He lives alone, apart from his cat Ginger. The garden, including the apple trees, is looked after by old Mr. Diggett, the gardener. And the cottage is looked after by Mrs. Daly, who comes in every day to cook and clean for Mr. Simpkin. Now, we'd like you to meet Mr. Simpkin, and Ginger, and Mrs. Daly, and old Mr. Diggett. Oh, and old Mr. Diggett's dog as well, who's called Bouncer. Bouncer by name, and Bouncer by nature. Now, as you may have very well guessed, someone else lives in the Apple Tree Cottage. If you go into the cottage by the front door, and go into the hall, and turn left into the dining room, and look very carefully at the wall with the picture hanging on it, you might notice something. A front door. A very tiny front door. And who do you think lives behind that tiny front door in the dining room, off the hall, behind the front door, behind the apple trees of Apple Tree Cottage? John Mouse. And Mr. and Mrs. Mouse. And old Grandpa Mouse. And Sophie and Amelia Mouse, who are John Mouse's twin sisters. The Mouse family. Can you tell which one is which? They all live together, rather comfortably, behind that tiny front door, in the dining room, off the hall, behind the front door, behind the apple trees of Apple Tree Cottage. The Mouse family are very happy in their little home. They're warm and dry and decidedly cosy. But whenever they go out, they have to be very careful. "Beware of Ginger the cat," Mrs. Mouse warns John Mouse. "Beware of Bouncer the dog," Mr. Mouse warns John Mouse. "Outside that door is trouble with a capital T," observes Grandpa Mouse from his favourite armchair. "Ew!" squeaks Sophie Mouse. "Ew! Ew!" squeaked Amelia Mouse. The mouse twins are too young to speak yet. Now, this story is about the time John Mouse had an adventure. He didn't really set out to have an adventure. It just sort of happened. And it happened very early one morning. John Mouse woke up in his little bed and thought he'd go outside to see what kind of day it was. So he climbed out of bed, dressed, washed his whiskers, squeezed some toothpaste from a tiny tube onto a tiny toothbrush, and cleaned his tiny teeth. Then he went out, over the front door, very quietly, ever so quietly, so as not to wake the rest of the Mouse family. John Mouse, remembering what Mrs. Mouse had told him, tiptoed through Mrs. Simpkin's dining room, quiet as anything. And quiet as a mouse, in fact. Then, after tiptoeing through Mr. Simpkin's hall, he slipped under Mr. Simpkin's front door and into Mr. Simpkin's garden. It was a beautiful morning. John Mouse, remembering what Mr. Mouse had told him, tiptoed through the long grass in the garden. Plop! A large, ripe red apple fell from the tree and onto the ground in front of him. John Mouse nearly jumped out of his mouse skin. After John Mouse had nearly jumped out of his mouse skin, he thought to himself, "As I haven't had my breakfast, I feel a little hungry." Mice never feel a lot hungry, because they're so little, which is why they only ever feel a little hungry. And because John Mouse felt a little hungry, he took out a little bite out of the big apple. But, by doing that, he became a little careless. Woof! It was Bouncer the dog, bouncing towards him. For the second time that morning, John Mouse nearly jumped out of his mouse skin. Woof! Woof! Barked Bouncer, getting nearer and nearer. "Oh dear!" squeaked John Mouse in alarm, and started climbing up one of the apple trees as fast as his paws could carry him. Woof! 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 barked Bouncer. And Bouncer bounced in the air and tried to reach John Mouse. John Mouse knew that as long as he stayed up in the apple tree, he was safe. But how was he going to get home? How was he going to get across Mrs. Simpkin's garden, and in through Mr. Simpkin's front door, and through Mrs. Simpkin's hall, and turning left, into Mr. Simpkin's dining room, and home sweet home without Bouncer noticing him? He had no idea. And because he had no idea, he felt very lonely sitting up in the apple tree. A little tear trickled down his face and onto his whiskers. Then, all of a sudden, as quick as a flash, before he could say John Mouse had an idea. A rather cheeky idea. And that cheered him up. And he wiped away his little tear and grinned a little grin. Woof! Barked Bouncer below. John Mouse put his paws against one of the apples on the apple tree and pushed with all his strength. Snap! The apple broke off its stem. Whiz! The apple fell through the air. Bang! The apple hit Bouncer on the head. Woof! Bouncer barked. He would have said, ouch! But dogs can't say ouch, can they? John Mouse grinned a larger grin and began to push another apple. Snap, whiz, bang, woof! The second apple hit the target. Snap, whiz, bang, woof! And the third. Snap, whiz, bang, woof! Snap, whiz, bang, woof! And the fourth and the fifth, and so it went on. Bouncer couldn't stand it any more, and he ran away with his tail between his legs. John Mouse slid down the tree, scampered across the garden, slipped into the front door, ran through the hall, shot across the dining room, and in through his front door. Phew! Later, when John Mouse was recounting his adventures to the Mouse family, he told them about the apples hitting Bouncer on the head. Snap! Giggled Mrs. Mouse. Whiz! Laughed Mr. Mouse. Bang! Grinned Grandpa Mouse. Woof! Barked John Mouse, imitating Bouncer. And all the Mouse family laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed, including the Mouse twins. Squeaked Xavier Mouse. Squealed Amelia Mouse. And that is the end of this John Mouse story.